All right, so I've cast on about 25 stitches and I've worked one or a couple of rows of stockinette stitch. The German short row can be done in stockinette or garter stitch. It can also be done very effectively in the round. So it is a very useful short row. It is also one that is very recognizable without having to place a marker. But I wanted to just talk a little bit, and maybe well, we can use the markers or not. Sorry, Nancy, we may or may not use the markers, but I want to talk a little bit about short rows and what happens with them. If you're working, so here's my working yarn. If you're working from the beginning of your row and it says to, knit 5 and turn back, and then knit 10 and turn back. So you're going to create a slant in your knitting like this with all of the stitches still live, but you'll be working past your short row. And so that's a very easy thing to do because you knit to where the short row is, and then you resolve it. You do whatever you need to do to resolve the short row, and then you knit past it, right? So not hard. So when you're doing that kind of a short row, it's very easy to see your short row turn from the row before and resolve it right then and keep going. But not every slant that you want to do is like that. Sometimes they're like this. And if that's the case, you might be working to the end, like 3 stitches before the end. And then it might say work to 3 stitches before this end. And then it might say 3 stitches before this end. And before you know it, you don't know where you are in the process. So I like to drop markers in for those, any short row that isn't resolved immediately, that you don't go back over in the very next row. I always think it's a good idea to drop markers in and to keep track of how many short rows you've done. Because sometimes if you have to put it down, because look at me, the phone rings every 2 minutes, that way you know where you are. So let's say we were going to do shoulder shaping and we had on a back and we had to do a short row here and a short row here. And then 3 stitches before we had to do a short row here. Then you had to put it down, then you picked it back up again, and you're in the middle of the row and you don't know where you are. So what I think is really helpful is if you place your markers for short rows that are not resolved in the next row. So you haven't missed anything yet, Doreen. So I'm going to keep it on gallery view, and I'm going to pin the video to me, because I found that in some of our other videos, it goes to somebody when I'm showing something. So I've cast on 25 stitches and I've worked 2 rows of stockinette, a knit row and a purl row, and I'm ready to do a knit row. German short rows can be done in stockinette, reverse stockinette, and in garter stitch. And they can be done back and forth or in the round. So I'm going to switch over to the camera. And I just want to write down that I've got Nancy, P, Linda. I do have, Doreen, do I have your email?
Yes, you do.
Okay, so I have a little class cheat sheet here that I'm going to be using. Isn't that amazing? It's backwards. So I'll be reading from that, but you won't be. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. So if you decide to try an online order again, email us first, and I'll email you a code to you.
I'm going to knit,
so that you can use that.
And let's do the example that I was talking about of some shoulder shaping, and then we'll go back, because that will involve both knitting and purling. And obviously, if you're doing stockinette or reverse stockinette or garter stitch, it either involves knitting or purling. So I'm just pulling out some markers to drop in that are white and easy to see. So I've got 25. I'm gonna knit to the far side till there's 5 stitches left. Did we talk about this?
Should we be trying to do this with you or watching is better?
You can try and do it. Let me figure out where my hands need to be. Of course, I'm using long needles instead of circular. So here's one of the things that I find very slow about doing short rows is that it says something like knit to so many stitches before the end. And look at my hand here. My thumb is covering all of those stitches when I knit. I can't see how many stitches before the end I am. It would be so much easier if I took a slip-in marker like this and put it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So before I started the row, if I put a marker where I want to go, I don't have to count. I don't have to keep stopping and thinking about it. So here I am at 5 stitches before the end. I'm going to move that one now. To do the German short row, you're going to go to the turning point and you're going to slip the next, you're going to go to the turning point and turn. So it's a little different than the wrap and turn. There's no wrapping and turning. You don't have to move the yarn in the stitch. So now I'm facing the other direction. And I'm going to go work back across these stitches here. Can you see that all right? Does it look a little upside down to you?
No?
It's okay. Okay.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip the next stitch purlwise. And I'm going to carry this working yarn. So I'm going to pull up the legs of the stitch below so they look like 2 stitches. So and the top of the stitch is on top of the needle. Okay? And then I want to carry it, if I'm going to purl, I want to carry it back to the front. So I want to just show you that the top of that stitch looks like a pretzel. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
called the double stitch. So another abbreviation for the German short row is the DS or double stitch. I want that to come into focus. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so then you're going to purl, and now I'm going to do the same thing. I want to purl to 5 stitches before the end. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to place my marker in there so I know what I'm doing. Also, I've done this double stitch, but what if I'm sort of dopey and I don't remember that I've done the double stitch? I'm going to just stick a marker on it. Then I know I've done it. And I'm going to go 1, 2, I'm going to go back to the other side. You know, in the fancy videos that speeds up while they knit back over. You don't have the control of time and space the way the fancy video people do. All right, so here I am at the 5 stitches before, and I seem to be very rough with that. And now I want to do the the German short row, and this time I'm going to turn, and the yarn is in back, but I want to bring it in front. So I want to bring the yarn between the needles to the front. Okay? And when I do that, I'm going to slip this stitch with the yarn in front, and I'm going to pull it up like that, and then I'm going to go down to the back of the stitch. And that's
Can
going
you do that again?
Okay. So I've come to the end of my purling. Before you do anything else, you turn.
Mm-hmm.
Before you do anything else, you have to move the yarn to the front between the needles. Okay? Then you slip it, and then you pull up on the legs on this working yarn to distort the stitch and create, see it, the the pretzel again. So I moved the yarn to the front, I slipped the stitch, and I pulled up on the working yarn to create that pretzel. And then I still hold it to the back and I knit. So I also am going to place a marker here. I feel like it's not auto-focusing.
It's not looking the same way.
That looks worse, doesn't it?
Hmm. The other one was good.
The other one was good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got that pretzel on top. It's really not. Oop, hello. Can you see that?
Yeah, but I'm not getting the pretzel.
So do you see that these sorry, everything is backwards for me. Can you see that these stitches on top look crossed like a pretzel? Like the center of a pretzel.
Mhm.
Okay. Well,
Right in here. I'm pulling up on one side, so they almost look like this. Like you're doing this to them. Can you see that here?
kind of.
You see that?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I'm just looking at mine. I'm not sure if mine's is correct or not, but I'll keep going.
So let's just try it again. So here's where you've made the turn from purl to the knit side. You bring the working yarn forward, slip the stitch, and then when you pull, it pulls up the leg of the stitch below. And then you're going to work that to the back. See how that looks?
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Put a marker there so that we're marking our turns. And now again, if we wanted to go 5 stitches before, you could throw in, so, you know, imagine you're doing the back of an adult sweater that's got 87 stitches. If you just count 5 before and throw in your slip-in marker, then you don't have to worry about it as you're working back to that place. So then I'm going to work back to that marker. And then I know I'm in the right place to do my next turn. Okay, so the turn from the knit side is the same thing. You just turn, your yarn's already in front, you slip the stitch, you elongate the legs by pulling up on the working yarn, and then you push it around to the other side, and then because we're going to be purling, I'm going to bring it forward. But you create this sort of double stitch that has this knot in it. Don't know why this is not focusing today. I feel like it should. There. You see it better there?
Yeah. Yeah, now it's good.
That's good. Okay, so that's what the double stitch looks like from the top. Again, I'm putting a marker in before I proceed. So now I'm going to resolve those stitches. I'm going to purl past them on this side. So I'm working along and I come to my first marker. The marker comes before the double stitch, but it's a little warning that what comes next isn't a mistake or a problem in my knitting. It's something I intentionally did. And that's what it looks like. So I'm going to put my right needle under both strands of the double stitch and work them as one, wrapping and pulling it off. And I've got Oh, I think I only have one on that side. But that's the trick, is that you work them as though they were a normal stitch. So I'm going to turn, and I have these 2 double stitches, and you can see, why is this not focusing? There. You can see them behind those markers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm looking for those as I go. And when I come to the marker, I know that that is a double stitch. Pull this a little bit further. So I'm not clicking my needles on everything. So I'm working back to the marker, and I've just gone over the first double stitch right there. That's it, between my thumbnails. So you can't really see it. There's this extra, like, right hand side of the stitch that's next to this thumb. You can just see a little extra little blip in there. That's the only hint that there was a double stitch. On the purl side, it's a little bit more noticeable. So there's this extra little bump of yarn on the purl side. Why can't I get it to focus there?
You want to bend it down so it's closer?
Well, I was holding it up and I've been holding it down. I'm so sorry, ladies. I've used this before and it seemed like it worked better. So I'm going to proceed to the next double stitch. And again, using markers helps you know that that's coming up. So there was my marker to tell me that this is not a mistake in my knitting. It is simply the short row shaping that I did. So I'm going to go knitwise into it under both sides and wrap. Oh, I did fix the thing. And then you can see there's like an extra twist to the side of the knit stitch. And on the back, there's a little bit of a bump. So if you're doing it on knit stitch and garter stitch, it's practically invisible. It might be a little bit more visible on, here we came to the next one. We can remove our marker, go into, sorry, I'm so sorry I keep moving my hands out of range. Into the stitch, just as, so that's what it looks like. You go to in between that stitch and the one next to it, go into it knitwise, work it as one. And that's the German short row. And you can see that we've done some considerable shaping to this piece of knitting. And that's sort of the beauty of short rows, is it makes your knitting have more shapes. The first time I ever did it, it was to make the snout of a teddy bear nose, which was a lot of fun. But it's not terribly noticeable on this side, which is another nice reason. And you don't have to resolve it in a very complicated way, which is my problem with the wrap and turn method. I find that hiding the wrap and turn from the right side of the work is a lot more problematic. The wrong side of this work, it's visible. You can probably find my short rows. Here's one. Here's one. That looks like one. But they're not real. That's one there. And that's one there. And that's one there. They're not terribly visible. Any questions?
So on instructions where it just says, wrap and turn.
Mm-hmm.
The wrap and turn is basically where that stitch that you would
So if you consider your double stitch as, so I think of the wrap and turn as essentially
Oh,
the stitch that you're wrapping around. I think of it like this needle, and the wrapping around it just creates like something to anchor the yarn to when you turn and go back. If you don't anchor the yarn in some way, then there's a big gap in between where you turn. So the whole idea between wrap and turn and the German short row and the Japanese short row and all the different methods is to create some point of anchor for the yarn so that it doesn't pull apart and make a big gap in your knitting. So if you've ever just tried to knit to a point and turn, and that's something, if you've got needles in your hand and you're practicing this, knit 10 and then just turn around and knit back, and then try knitting across that. And what you find is there's a big gap because one side is stepped up from the other because there's two extra rows, and one side has been worked and the other hasn't. So you have to like you have to come down to that point. And so the whole point of doing a short row shaping is so that when you come down to that point, there's very little evidence that you have. And that's kind of what you're seeing in this, is there's very little evidence that any shaping was going on.
But in the wrap and turn instructions, is the stitch versus wrap turn. Which stitch are you then doing that German short row on?
So you need to pay attention to where they want the turns to happen. And generally, I would say make the wrapped stitch the double stitch. So you would knit to the same point. The regular knitting would be in the same place. And then the next stitch, so you would knit the wrapped stitch. To transfer it to a German short row, instead of doing it as a wrap and turn, you would work to the wrapped stitch and work it, and then turn and create the double stitch out of it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm happy to keep talking.